Let me bring in Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor and Fox News contributor, who has been really our go-to as we have followed this throughout the course of this trial. Mercedes Colwin joining us. She's a criminal defense attorney and, of course, a Fox News legal analyst who you know very well as well. Thank you to both of you. Good to have you here today. So, Andy, if I may start with you, your thoughts on what the jury has asked for specifically. There was a lot of talk earlier about a drone video. It turns out it's a little something different that they are interested in. Get us up to speed here if you can.
Yeah, I think, Martha, if there was one factual dispute in this case, it's who is the aggressor when there was this confrontation between Kyle Rittenhouse, the defendant, and Joseph Rosenbaum, who was the first person who was shot and killed. The defense has argued from the beginning, I've thought they've had the better of the argument on this, that Rittenhouse was fleeing away. He was not the assailant, and it was Rosenbaum who was the aggressor when the shooting happened. The prosecutors have used some video evidence, including some that was interjected at the end, which the defense says is distorted, to suggest that it was Rittenhouse who was the aggressor, not Rosenbaum. And I think what the jury is trying to do is home in on that. So they want to see the video evidence in particular of that exchange or that confrontation, because according to the prosecution, that is the provocation in their mind by Rittenhouse that explains everything else that happens that night.
So, Mercedes, your understanding of what they're asking for here, and we're seeing, we're watching the room on the right-hand side. You see Kyle Rittenhouse as he waits for the, oh, okay, that's not live. That's from earlier. So there's also this other video, the BG on the scene video, which is of the exchange with Gage Grosskreutz, who was wounded by Kyle Rittenhouse. And that they want, that there's a slow-mo video of that, and that they want to take a look at that exchange between Rittenhouse and Grosskreutz as well in this. Right. What does that tell you?
Well, Grosskreutz testified, and frankly for the prosecution, that he actually pointed his gun at Rittenhouse at the time that he was shot. So the whole issue about self-defense certainly falls squarely within just the testimony alone. What I think is interesting is that the jury's blown past the argument that the prosecution was trying to set forth for the jury. Is the fact that Rittenhouse came with an AR-15, that alone is a provocation, and that's why he was attacked. It's an argument, frankly, that really does have some traction, and given the fact that that provocation in jury instruction was ruled on just at the pretty much at the end, at the very end when they were talking about the jury instructions, that was a big win for the prosecution. So now that the jury's sort of blown past it, and now they're really dicing and slicing this whole argument about self-defense, they've blown past the provocation argument just in the sense that the AR-15, the presence of the gun in and of itself, was a provocation, and therefore that's why Rittenhouse was then attacked by those that ultimately lost their lives, and one person, obviously Grosskreutz, that's still alive but injured. And that's to me, that was probably the most interesting, because frankly, given that most recent ruling by the judge, I thought that was the greatest chance that the prosecution had to have a conviction of one of the charges.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that they are focusing on this this Grosskreutz video at this point, Andy. Does that signal to you? I mean, it's really hard to know what order they're going through this in, but the counts come through with the very first count dealing with Rosenbaum, and then it goes, I think the third or fourth is where they start to deal with Grosskreutz. Would it be typical that they would be going in order, and would that indicate to you, or can we glean from that perhaps they are already down to that part of the counts?
Yeah, ordinarily, one of the ways that they organize themselves is they have the jury charge in the room. They probably also have the bare bones of the indictment. In federal court, at least, it would be pretty typical for the jury to be given the indictment. And often what they do is they go through it as if it were an agenda of items that they have to get through. And chronologically, obviously, it makes the most sense to do that as well. So the case is charged in temporal terms, in terms of which shootings happened at which time, and they're asking to look at the video evidence, which is obviously linear too. So it's a reasonable assumption that they're moving through each individual one.
And they, do we have any sense of how far they are through this process at this point? We know that the judge said they would come back into the courtroom to watch all of this. Mercedes, do you know where they are right now in that process?
Not really, but what I'll tell you from a defense attorney's perspective, the longer the deliberation, the more likelihood it's either a hung jury or a conviction. So I will tell you, most defense attorneys like that shorter deliberation. As you pointed out, O.J. Simpson was 4 hours. Pretty much they knew that that would have meant an acquittal. So the longer they take, there's probably a lot of convincing. There might be some holdout jurors, and we'll have to see. But it certainly seems right, what Andy said, that there is this linear fashion deliberation, and they're getting through each individual charge to make a determination on each one.
Yeah, just to clarify what I said, the charge, it's count 5, actually, of the 5 counts that deals with Gage Grosskreutz, who was shot in the arm seconds after the shooting of Huber, which is count 4. So it may be significant, as we mentioned, that they are now on to count 5 in this process. But Andy, what about Mercedes' point that we're now 13 plus hours into this and they have asked for several things over the course of today? Does that indicate to you that there's some tussle going on between some of these jurors?
You never know. I mean, 13 hours really isn't that long deliberation after a trial that's gone on for a couple of weeks. I think the trial, I think there were 10 days of testimony, maybe 9 days of testimony, and they go through it carefully. I don't think it's that long yet. I think if it went through tomorrow, then you'd be talking about a very long time. But the other thing, Martha, is we won't know what the dynamic is in the jury room. I've had cases where the jury substantially decided things pretty quickly, but they had 1 or 2 people who needed to be convinced about different things. And sometimes you think that something because of a note that they send in, where the jury must be hung up on something. And what it turns out is that the substantial number of the juries, the majority of the jurors, want to make the holdouts look at something that they claim is a sticking point.
Yeah.
So a lot of this we just won't know until after this is all over and we get some reporting on it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's been my experience that, having participated as a juror a couple of times, that these juries take it very seriously. And they understand that this young man's life is in the balance here, that he's facing up to 60 years, life in prison. So this is a very, very important decision that they're making, and they're going through it, no doubt, carefully. And none of us know what's going on in there, but we can speculate based on prior experience.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.